Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is SockBot, and I just want to start this video off by apologizing for whatever kind of video quality this is, because my camera thought it was charging, but it's not, and today's my only date to film, really. But ignoring all of that, today I want to talk about timelines, I want to talk about keyframes, and I want to talk about animations in general. This is going to be on a rather basic level, but there's a lot of things that I have learned since doing all the tutorials and working with animations quite a bit in Dreams that, well, they don't really tell you. And if they do tell you, they tell you very briefly and completely gloss over what these things actually do. So in a sort of follow-up to the only other video I've done like this, which was like things that you don't know about sculpting and shapes, well, that's what we're going to do today, is talk a little bit about the things that you might not have realized about animations and timelines, and just show you kind of what I do to get around some of the base settings that either don't work so well for the things that I like to do with animations, or things that just are set up to default to things that make your animations look weird and do weird things. So hopefully these tips today are helpful to you. If they are, feel free to leave a like down below, and feel free to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, but no pressure as always. But anyways, let's get right into these little tips that I hope you know, but if you don't, here they are. So to start off, I want to give like kind of a quick intro on keyframes. If you don't know how to use keyframes, that's totally fine, but I want to explain a little bit about how they work. And so if you didn't watch the tutorial, that's what this is for. To start off, you're going to want to take one keyframe and kind of grab the first piece that you want to move, that you want to start in that position. I tend to place the shape in the position I want it to start in before I use any keyframes, just to avoid confusion when I'm going through the rest of my level, because if you do tend to move things around after you keyframe them, it can kind of be a little bit confusing, and especially if your first keyframe is where you want it to start, and you don't move it there before you keyframe it, it can then snap back to its original position, and this can be very confusing for when you're keyframing. So yes, grab a keyframe, grab that first piece, and just touch it slightly with the R2 button when you're recording for that keyframe. Following that, you're going to want to grab another keyframe and move the object into the finishing spot. For example, this door I'm working on here is going to start closed and then open once you input the key into this little keypad here, which, by the way, is just a keypad I grabbed off of the community, so highly recommend. I'll obviously show who created this keypad if you are interested in using it. But once you have both of those, you're going to plonk those two keyframes, the starting position towards the left of the timeline and the ending position towards the right of the timeline, however many seconds in you want to place it. You can always modify this later, but then you're going to hold L1 and press X on the space between them to blend them into each other to make it actually move between the two, as opposed to just snapping between the two keyframes. Now, I want to mention here one of the most important tips that I have ever come across, and by that I mean that I figured out myself about keyframes, and that's that keyframes will reference things within the current group and in reference to that current group. For example, if you have a group of two objects, in other words, you take those two objects and then use the grouping function to group them together. Let's say they're two cubes. Well, if you have two cubes and they're in a group and you keyframe one of those cubes inside that group to move up and down, it will move up and down in reference to that group, meaning if you move that group all together, you will move that entire animation alongside that group. However, if you decide to put those two cubes in separate groups and animate the one cube moving up and down, then, well, they're not going to move at all when you move the objects themselves. So in other words, that timeline is going to constantly snap the cube back to the original position it was in if you don't have it in its own group. I explain a lot of that in the Fireball tutorial I made, so definitely go watch that if you want a little bit more in depth there, because I know that that is not an explanation that will make sense to everybody here, but if you are interested, definitely go watch that. It's a great basis for any keyframe stuff that you will be working on. So next, some of the settings that I like to work with when I'm working in Dreams. All of the different animations that I've created, except for minor character animations, have been entirely simple animations. For example, opening doors, platforms that launch people, an elevator I made at some point, and for every single one of these, I have turned off smoothing within the keyframe options. Again, to access these options, go over the keyframes, hold L1 and press square, and you can then see that there's a little option there that is default checked, and that is smoothing. I turn that off because honestly it makes all of my different animations look very weird, and it makes it so that when the object is moving to one of the endpoints, it tends to not fully reach it before it continues on to the next part of the animation. Now, I believe if you're moving something in like a circle, for example, if there's something that's supposed to move in like a round fashion, and you keyframe all four vertices of the top, bottom, left, and right of that circle, and then turn on smoothing. That is a use that I have found for it now that I'm thinking about it, and that will, instead of just making it move in a diamond shape, it'll make it move in a circle shape. So great for an option, but honestly I don't think that most people are going to expect that a keyframe would do that by default, so I think this should probably just be an option, not the default. But anyways, for the majority of animations I use, I just turn off smoothing. Now as for keep changes, I still find this finicky because it doesn't always keep the changes, especially when you're making something that's supposed to move and then move again, and then move again after that throughout the same timeline. It doesn't always work the way I want it to, and I'm sure that there are some intricacies that I'm not fully aware of yet, but I tend to turn this on for just about everything. Even if it's something that is opening and closing, I just create two timelines that are in reverse to animate it closing and animate it opening, and then obviously I have static keyframes that will keep it open or keep it closed if that's the route I take. Again, I talk about this way more in depth in the elevator tutorial, but this is a more overview kind of features that you may have ignored. So if you are interested in that, definitely go watch the elevator tutorial. I'm not just plugging my other videos here, it's just I don't want to go over all of this in depth because we'll be here for half an hour. Now finally, and this is something that I've just kind of sort of had to work around because I haven't found a great way to do this inside of animations, but if you are interested in making something that launches a player or something that moves very, very, very quickly, there are some limitations when it comes to a timeline. You can obviously place the two keyframes next to each other and blend them together using any sort of blend you want, and then to kind of shift them as close as possible, and that will make them move almost instantaneously, but still not quite quick enough for a lot of things that might be kind of small movements that you really want to have a launching effect on any sort of player. Now, if you are trying to do this, that's the first step I recommend. Then you can go into the options of the timeline itself and speed it up to about 200%, but unfortunately, that is the highest it goes, and if that is not enough to launch your player or to be as fast as you want it to be, the only thing I can really recommend at this point is that if you want it to be faster, well, you're either going to have to increase the motion that it's going through, because then it'll take the same time to go over a greater distance, which means its velocity is faster. Physics. But if you can't make it go fast enough through these two options, I honestly am not sure of any other option to go with. I have been meaning to try with a value slider and trying to increase that above 200%, but I've noticed other places where if you try to input a number above that that technology's maximum number, it just defaults to the maximum. So it's possible that's not possible, but I'll update this video in a pinned comment down below if I do try that and if it works. Otherwise, assumedly, this is the fastest that you can make things work. And finally, and this is like a big kind of all-in-one section, don't forget that you can put just about anything in timelines. For one, you can put any sort of sound effect in there if you want to limit it to just that section, and this makes it a lot easier if you want to have sound effects for different sort of motions. Like this door that I've created in this sort of intro sequence here when I was describing things earlier, this door has a creak in it, and I want that creak to play just during the movement, and so after grabbing the sound effect of a creak, oh gosh, creak is such a hard word to say over and over, and then just shortening it to that one section, well, one, make sure that your sound effect actually still sounds good and it doesn't sound like it's cutting off. This is the only sound effect that's ever actually sounded good, but you can also speed up that sound effect in the sound effects options to make it fit that section. But placing this in the timeline during the movement is a really easy way to shorten it and make sure it's only playing during that movement. Additionally, you can place just about any sort of switch on there, but the only one that I found that I've really been able to use is the actual switch, the toggle switch that goes on and off, because if you place that within a timeline like this, it will output a value that you assign it at a constant rate during the time that you extend it for this timeline. Now, like with keyframes, you can extend it by holding up or down on the D-pad to enlarge it or shrink it, and once you do this, when the timeline is playing that section of the timeline, or rather, when it's playing that section of the timeline, the game itself, it will turn on that switch. So anything that you connect that switch to will turn on just during that part of the timeline. Now, this is useful in numerous scenarios. I'm sure you can think of far more than I can, but the biggest part that I use this is for moving objects like doors and the elevators, actually probably not the elevators, but any sort of door or latch or thing that you don't want the player to get hit by. I tend to use a switch like this during the movement to turn off collision for this object. So I'll take that switch, I'll place it in the timeline during the movement section, and I will connect it to a not switch, and then connect that not switch to the collisions that are normally on for this object. For example, this door normally collides with enemies and players, and by doing this, it will turn off collision for the door during the time that it's moving. So for example, if you're standing in front of this enormous door, which could easily knock you off the map or knock you into something and kind of glitch out, instead, it will just go right through you during this. And this is especially useful for areas like this one in particular, where you're not controlling the character at the time, and so it would be very annoying for your character and camera to get launched across the screen after you input a code while you're trying to reattach to your character. So that's what I do for a lot of different things. I do this for latches, I do this for various, like the dumpster in the previous level I was working on, and it can be very useful, but obviously there are 1,000 more uses for this. So feel free to leave any that you found in the comments down below for anybody that may be watching this video and looking for a little bit of assistance on this. But yeah, again, I'm sorry for the weird quality in this video. I promise my camera will be charged by the time I film the next one, but I want to just get out a few quick tips about timelines that I've learned over the course of 4 games now that have been a bit of a pain to learn. Again, one of the biggest things about this that I didn't mention here exists within that fireball video. I didn't want to go over that because that would have doubled the length of this video, so if you are interested specifically in how different keyframes affect groups, and more importantly, if you're having trouble working with timelines in the sense that you feel like it's not localizing itself, and whenever you move something, it's screwing up your timeline, well, that's definitely a video you want to go watch, because it has to do with groups, and that's probably what's so confusing, because it took me hours to figure out, even with the help of one of my good friends, Andrew. Now, if you have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I'm not sure if I will be able to answer them, but I will definitely do my best. I am an amateur creator, as always, so feel free to subscribe if you want to see more of this, and to grow with me as we learn all of the intricacies of this wonderful meme game that we are working for. For reference, that was meme-e. I don't actually think M-E is pronounced meme. I keep dating myself on this channel, but like I said, feel free to like the video and subscribe if you want to. No pressure as always. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for watching this rather short and simple video, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. But for right now, have a wonderful day, and goodbye.